Have you ever wondered how a man at the peak of power, surrounded by allies, enemies, and the weight of an entire movement, could vanish in broad daylight without leaving a single trace? On the afternoon of July 30th, 1975, in Detroit, Michigan, a 62-year-old man named Jimmy Hoffa drove to a suburban restaurant called the Machu's Red Fox. Hoffa wasn't just any man. He was one of the most famous labor leaders in American history, president of the powerful Teamsters Union. That afternoon, he told family members he had a meeting with two men linked to organized crime. He parked his car in the lot. He waited. He made a phone call to his wife. And then nothing. From that moment on, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. No witnesses saw him leave. No evidence showed what happened. His car was found abandoned later that day. 7 years passed before a court finally declared him legally dead in 1982. And yet, 50 years later, the question remains unsolved. What really happened to Jimmy Hoffa? The FBI has spent decades investigating, digging in fields, searching under bridges, even tearing up backyards in the hopes of finding clues. Millions of dollars, countless man-hours, and still no body, no murder weapon, no crime scene. The mystery is so enduring that, as recently as July 2025, the Detroit field office of the FBI released a public statement asking anyone with credible information to come forward. After half a century, the case is still open. This story has fascinated generations because it's more than just a disappearance. It's the intersection of labor history, organized crime, politics, and the very question of how power is gained and lost. Was Hoffa silenced by the Mafia for pushing too hard to regain control of the Teamsters? Did his own allies betray him? Or was it something else entirely? Many theories exist. Some, like the account later told by Frank Sheeran, the man portrayed in the book and film The Irishman, remain unverified. When I mention these, I'll be clear that they are considered speculation, not proven fact. Today, in this episode of Cold Case Files, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, we'll step back into that hot Detroit afternoon in 1975. We'll trace Hoffa's rise from a young man fighting for truck drivers' rights to a labor titan caught between workers and the mob. We'll walk through the timeline of his final day, the investigation that followed, the suspects who were questioned, and the theories, both official and unofficial, that still surround his name. But before we get to the clues and the suspects, we need to understand the man himself. Who is Jimmy Hoffa? Why was he such a towering figure in mid-20th century America? And why would so many people, powerful people, want him out of the picture? Let's begin there. To understand why Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance shook America, we first have to step into his world. Detroit, 1975. It was a city in transition, and not in a good way. Factories that had once been symbols of American strength were starting to close their doors. Auto plants cut shifts, neighborhoods faced unemployment, and the once booming Motor City was sliding into decline. And yet, in the middle of all this uncertainty, there was one institution that still carried enormous power: the Teamsters Union. With more than 2 million members at its height, the Teamsters controlled not just trucking, but much of the transportation that kept America running. When the Teamsters spoke, politicians listened. When the Teamsters threatened to strike, industries trembled. Jimmy Hoffa had risen from humble beginnings into the heart of that movement. Born in 1913, he grew up in a poor family in Indiana. His father died when Jimmy was only 7 years old, and his mother struggled to provide. That kind of childhood forged a toughness in him. By his teens, Hoffa was already helping organize workers, demanding fair treatment for truck drivers who often worked long hours for low pay. By 1957, he had become president of the Teamsters. To many rank-and-file members, Hoffa was their champion. He negotiated better contracts, fought for pensions, and promised that no truck driver would be left behind. Workers adored him for it. Some even described him as a man who never forgot where he came from. But there was another side. Hoffa's climb to power was built not only on loyalty from workers, but also on uneasy alliances. According to FBI files and congressional investigations, organized crime families had their hands in the union. Mobsters saw the Teamsters' vast pension fund, billions of dollars, as an irresistible resource. Loans from that fund flowed into casino projects, real estate deals, and ventures tied to crime families. This is where Hoffa's story becomes more complicated. Was he using the Mafia, or was the Mafia using him? The answer depends on whom you ask. What's clear is that by the 1960s, his connections drew the attention of the federal government. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy made Hoffa his #1 target, and in 1967 Hoffa went to prison for jury tampering, fraud, and conspiracy. 4 years later, in 1971, he walked free thanks to a commutation from President Richard Nixon. But there was a catch. Hoffa was banned from engaging in union activity until 1980. He had no intention of waiting that long. By 1975, he was determined to claw his way back into power, to reclaim the Teamsters' presidency he still believed was rightfully his. That ambition put him at odds with dangerous people. Mafia figures who had grown comfortable with Hoffa out of the picture didn't want him back. His former allies were now rivals. Old friends became enemies. Imagine for a moment that you're a Teamster in Detroit at the time. Your union is strong, but whispers about mob ties make headlines. Your leader, the man you trusted to fight for your paycheck, has been in prison, and now he's pushing to return. And then suddenly he vanishes. No explanation. No closure. Only rumors. How would you feel? Betrayed? Afraid? Confused? For thousands of working-class families, Hoffa's disappearance wasn't just a crime story. It was personal. His vanishing symbolized something larger. The growing realization that organized crime had reached deep into the heart of America's labor movement. The Hoffa case forced ordinary citizens to confront the uneasy truth that corruption and violence might be shaping the future of their jobs. And that brings us back to that fateful day. July 30th, 1975. Jimmy Hoffa was still determined, still fighting for his return, when he headed to a meeting he believed would decide his future. He told his family where he was going. He got into his car. He drove to the Machu's Red Fox restaurant. But what happened next would make history. By the summer of 1975, Jimmy Hoffa was a man in a hurry. He was restless, determined to reclaim his old throne. And so, on July 30th, he arranged a meeting that he believed would be the first step back into power. The meeting was supposed to take place at a suburban restaurant just outside Detroit, a place called the Machu's Red Fox. Hoffa told his family he was meeting two men, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mobster known for his sharp suits and even sharper temper, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamster official with strong Mafia ties. That afternoon, Hoffa pulled into the parking lot. It was broad daylight, a little after 2 o'clock. He was driving his green Pontiac Grandville, the car he used most often. He waited. Minutes ticked by. The men he expected never arrived. At 2:15, Hoffa grew impatient. He picked up a payphone outside the restaurant and called his wife, Josephine. He told her he had been stood up, that he was annoyed, and that he would be home for dinner. That was the last time anyone ever heard his voice. From there, the timeline goes dark. Witnesses later reported seeing Hoffa pacing near his car, looking irritated, even gesturing as if in an argument on the phone. Some claimed they saw him climb into another vehicle, though accounts differ on the make and model. What we know for certain is that when evening came, his Pontiac was still in the parking lot. The keys were inside. Hoffa was gone. Police searched the car but found nothing. No blood, no fingerprints pointing to strangers, no signs of a struggle. For someone as high profile as Hoffa, his disappearance was chillingly clean. And that's where the first mystery lies. If Hoffa had powerful enemies, why was there no trace? No body. No witnesses willing to speak. Just silence. It was as if he had stepped off the edge of the world. Theories began almost immediately. Was the meeting itself a setup? Was Hoffa lured there under the promise of reconciliation, only to be betrayed? Imagine standing in that lot on a hot Detroit afternoon, watching him wait, unaware it would be his last day alive. It's a haunting picture. Over the years, rumors multiplied. Some said Hoffa was driven to a nearby house, murdered, and cremated in a mob-controlled funeral home. Others swore his body was buried under the concrete of Giants Stadium in New Jersey, a story the FBI later dismissed after extensive searches. One of the most famous claims came decades later, from Frank Sheeran, a man nicknamed the Irishman, a longtime associate of both the Teamsters and the mob. In a 2004 book written by Charles Brandt, Sheeran confessed to killing Hoffa himself, shooting him inside a Detroit house. This version of events inspired the 2019 film The Irishman. But here's the key detail. Sheeran's story has never been verified. No physical evidence has ever supported his confession, and the FBI has never closed the case on that basis. To this day, it remains speculation. What investigators did have were tantalizing fragments. A few witnesses reported seeing a maroon Mercury in the parking lot, a car tied to one of Hoffa's associates. Others remembered Hoffa speaking to a man they couldn't identify, but none of it added up to proof. The clean disappearance left detectives frustrated. They had a missing person, a powerful list of enemies, but not a single piece of physical evidence to anchor the investigation. It's rare in true crime for someone so prominent to simply vanish without a trace. And yet, that's exactly what happened. As we look back, it's worth asking, was Hoffa reckless, showing up to a meeting with men he knew could not be trusted? Or was he confident, believing his status would protect him? What do you think? Was this the act of a man walking into a trap, or did something more unexpected occur? By nightfall, Josephine Hoffa knew something was wrong. Her husband had promised to be home for dinner. He never arrived. She called friends, then the police. Soon, the FBI was notified. Within hours, one of the most extensive manhunts in American history began. And yet, for all the resources thrown at it, the trail remained faint. A car left behind. A phone call cut off by time. Whispers of Mafia involvement. Nothing more. But this was only the beginning. As the investigation widened, agents and reporters turned to the obvious question. If Hoffa didn't simply vanish, then who made him disappear? And why? That's where we'll go next. Now we turn to the investigation itself, the long, grinding search for answers that followed Hoffa's disappearance. For decades, the case has been handled by federal agents working with state and local police, and it's a record of painstaking interviews, fruitless digs, and stubborn leads that never quite connected the dots. From the very start, the FBI treated Hoffa's disappearance as more than a missing person matter. Agents interviewed hundreds of people. Union members, mob associates, friends, distant acquaintances who might have seen something that afternoon. They canvassed neighborhoods, tracked vehicles, and followed tips that ranged from plausible to implausible. The effort was enormous, and it stretched across state lines as investigators chased every thread. The point wasn't just to find Hoffa. It was to establish what happened, who was involved, and why. Investigators searched everywhere rumors suggested a body might be hidden. Over the years, that meant remote fields in northern Oakland County, excavations on private properties, and searches in New Jersey near old landfills and under bridges where, in the 1970s and later decades, tipsters and mob informants pointed authorities. Those searches were exhaustive and sometimes dramatic. Heavy equipment, forensic teams, and weeks-long digs. But crucially, they produced no confirmed remains tied to Hoffa. The trail kept running cold. That absence of a body became the central investigative obstacle. Without a body, there's no crime scene, no forensic evidence, and no ability to link a cause of death to a suspect in court. Witnesses were often reluctant to talk. Some feared retribution, others' memories dimmed over decades, and a few gave conflicting accounts. Over time, names surfaced again and again in interviews and court files. Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a Teamsters official with documented ties to organized crime. Anthony Giacalone, a Detroit figure long linked to mob activity. And Charles Chucky O'Brien, who had a complicated familial relationship with Hoffa and whose car and behavior drew scrutiny at the time. These names appear in contemporaneous reports and later retrospectives, and they formed the backbone of the investigators' suspect list. Then there are the confessions and claims that captured public attention, but did not close the case. In 2004, a man named Frank Sheeran, described in Charles Brandt's book I Heard You Paint Houses and later dramatized in the film The Irishman, said he had a role in Hoffa's death. Sheeran's account is vivid and specific. He described meeting Hoffa at a house in Detroit and killing him there. It's the kind of confession that would settle the matter, except for one crucial fact. It has never been independently verified. No physical evidence has emerged to corroborate his story, and federal authorities have not closed the case based on that claim alone. Because of that, Sheeran's version remains an unproven but influential piece of the Hoffa puzzle. Investigators also had to deal with organized crime, an institution built on secrecy, loyalty, and intimidation. The FBI's files, congressional probes in earlier decades, and court records paint a picture in which mob influence penetrated union leadership, finance, and local industry. That made witnesses wary and evidence scarce. Mob structures create layers of insulation. One person orders, another carries out, a third disposes, and many never speak. For law enforcement, the result was a case with names and motive, but little in the way of linkable evidence. That scenario explains, in part, why the Hoffa disappearance resisted prosecution, even when suspicion fell on specific individuals. Over the decades, attention waxed and waned. The FBI reopened lines of inquiry, followed new tips, and mounted searches prompted by aging mobsters' claims. In 2013, for example, agents excavated property in northern Oakland Township after a tip tied that land to a possible burial. In more recent years, searches shifted to sites tied to old landfill records and to areas in New Jersey that once fed into municipal dumps. Each time, the work was meticulous and slow, carting soil, testing for organic traces, and bringing in anthropologists, but again, no body was discovered that could be tied to Hoffa. Those null results frustrated investigators and kept the case unresolved. Still, official investigators have never stopped seeking credible leads. In July 2025, as the 50th anniversary of Hoffa's disappearance was marked across news outlets, the FBI Detroit field office reiterated that its commitment to the case continued and urged anyone with information to come forward. That public plea underscores a reality of cold cases. Time helps some investigations and hinders others. Memories fade, witnesses die, physical traces degrade, but sometimes, decades later, a previously silent witness decides to speak, or a new piece of technology sheds light where none existed before. For Hoffa, that possibility remains, however slim it may feel after 50 years. So where does that leave us? Investigators have motive, they have suspects, and they have a long trail of whispers and tips. What they lack is the unambiguous evidence that turns suspicion into charges and charges into convictions. That gap is the cruelest part of this story, not only for justice, but for Hoffa's family, who have lived with questions instead of answers. Before we move to the final part of this episode, take a moment. What detail strikes you most about the investigation? Is it the failure to find a body, the persistent but unproven confessions, or the way organized crime can obscure truth for generations? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes public attention is what nudges an old case back into motion. Next, we'll step back and look at the wider meaning of Hoffa's disappearance, what it taught America about labor, power, and the reach of organized crime, and what remains for investigators and for history to untangle. And so, here we are, half a century later, still without the one thing that could finally close this story: the truth about what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. We've walked through the last known moments of his life, the abandoned car in that parking lot, the suspects with motives and mob ties, and the decades of investigations that turned up everything except a body. What we're left with is a case that remains officially unsolved, yet deeply etched into American memory. Hoffa's disappearance was never just about one man. It symbolized the tangled relationship between labor unions and organized crime, and it spotlighted the FBI's relentless, if frustrating, pursuit of justice against the mob. For workers, Hoffa was a champion who secured wages and protections. For others, he was a man whose ambition and associations pulled him too close to dangerous forces. Either way, his vanishing act left a scar that has never healed. Think about it, 50 years of rumors, theories, and confessions. Some people believe Hoffa was buried under stadium concrete. Others say he was cremated, erased without a trace. Still others accept Frank Sheeran's account, even though it remains unverified. And yet, despite all these possibilities, there is no closure, no confirmed answer to what happened on that July afternoon in 1975. It's haunting, isn't it? A man so public, so powerful, able to draw headlines across the nation. Gone in an instant, with no trace left behind. Now I want to turn this over to you. Who do you think was truly behind Hoffa's disappearance? Was it Tony Provenzano and his Mafia allies? Was it an inside betrayal by someone closer to him? Or do you believe Hoffa might be resting in some hidden place, still waiting to be discovered? And here's the big question. Do you think we'll ever find his remains, or has time buried the last clues forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your theories, your questions, even your doubts. They're all part of keeping this conversation alive. After all, some of the biggest breakthroughs in cold cases have started when someone spoke up, or when a new perspective made investigators look twice. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of America's most enduring mysteries. If you enjoyed this episode of Cold Case Files, The Disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next story we unravel. Because even though 50 years have passed, the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa still lingers. And maybe, just maybe one day, the silence will finally be broken.